Hello, and here we go. We're going to learn about solving polynomials today. So let's jot down some notes. And we will title it Lesson 7.5. That's the section it matches up with in your textbook, so you could go to that section of your textbook and get more information about solving polynomials in factored form. Solving polynomials in factored form. All right, so there's two things you need to know before we begin. And so the first one is, what in the world is factored form? Okay, so we need to know what is factored form. And factored form is when the polynomial is written with quantities or pieces of it multiplied together. Okay, so this would be an example of factored form. X times the quantity x plus 2. All right, because you have a couple things being multiplied. You have x being multiplied to x plus 2. All right, so it's before you distribute. And factored form is different than standard form. All right. Standard form is when you have it all multiplied out. So standard form would be is if you took this and you distributed it and put it in correct order. All right, so the standard form would be x squared plus 2x. All right, so that's when things are separated by addition. Factored form, they're separated by multiplication. All right, so factored form, we have to have multiplied pieces or quantities. All right, one more example of factored form might be like x minus 3, the quantity of x minus 3 times the quantity of x plus 8. All right, that's factored form because you have two quantities being multiplied together. Versus standard form, that'd be after you multiply it out. X times x is x squared. And then this would be 8x, right? X times 8, 8x. And these two would be negative 3x. And 8x with a negative 3x would be 5x. Try to do that in my head a little bit. And then negative 3 times 8, negative 24. Okay? So we have factored form is when you have things separated by multiplication, different than standard form. Standard form, they're separated by adding or subtracting. All right? Okay, there's one more thing you need to know before we can actually do the problems. So the next thing you need to know is this property called the zero product property. The zero product property. And that's a property you actually already know. So zero product property. That is when you have a couple things being multiplied together. Anything, or it could be three things, whatever. Things multiplied together. That's what product means, right? Product means multiply. And if the answer equals 0, well, doesn't that tell you that at least one of these squares has to equal 0, right? At least one of the squares has to equal 0. And at least one box has to equal 0. It's the only way you're going to get 0 for your answer after multiplying. So one of these has to be 0. This one could be 10. 10 times 0 is going to equal 0. This one could be 1,000. 1,000 times 0, then this one would have to be 0. All right, the only way you're going to get 0 after you multiply is if you're multiplying by 0. One of these has to be 0. Okay? So if you had 3 times something and you know the answer is 0, doesn't that blank have to be 0? Right? If you had a blank times 8 times 5 times negative 12, and you know the answer is 0, well, as soon as you see that the answer, the product here at the end is 0, then you know something has to be 0. Okay? And you could have blank times 44 times another blank times 3. And if the answer is 0, then one of these, excuse me, has to be 0. One of them has to be 0. All right, let's try some algebra. So you test them. If you try negative 5, what's negative 5 plus 5? Well, that's 0. And then you plug it in here too, it doesn't matter. Negative 5 minus 10, that's negative 15. But what's 0 times negative 15? 0. Great, that one works. Now you try 10. 10 plus 5 is 15. 10 minus 10, 0. 15 times 0, 0. So here are your two solutions. All right, let's try one more. All right, second example. 5x times the quantity of 2x minus 5 times the quantity of 1/2 x plus 3 equals 0. So here's the critical parts, or the critical things you need. You need it in factored form, all right? So we have times, 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 which is multiplication, multiplication, multiplication. So that's factored form, good. And it has to equal 0. Okay, that means one of these factors, one of these has to equal 0. So you look at each factor individually. So we'll start with this one. 5 could equal, wait, 5 can't equal 0. So you don't even have to worry about that. No, 5's never going to equal 0. X could equal 0. This whole quantity, 2x minus 5, might equal 0. And then 1/2 x plus 3 might equal 0. Okay? One of these factors has to equal 0 because we're multiplying. And when you multiply and you know the answer is 0, that means you had to multiply by 0. Okay, so the first one, no, 5's never going to equal 0, so forget that. The second factor, x could equal 0. Okay, that one's done. X could equal 0. Next one we need to solve. So add 5 to both sides. And then divide by 2. X could equal 5/2, or 2.5. And then subtract 3. Solve this one by subtracting 3 from both sides. And then multiplying by the reciprocal here. X could equal negative 6. So, your solution, x could equal 0, or 5/2, or negative 6. If you plug 0 in right there, that means, see how you'd be multiplying by 0? That means the whole thing's going to be 0. 5/2, when you plug it in here, 5/2, it turns this quantity into 0. That means you're multiplying by 0. You're going to get 0. And then if you get negative 6, you plug it in. You'll plug it in all the x's, but when you plug it here, you'll get 0, which makes you multiplying by 0. You'll get 0. All right. I hope this is helpful. Ask questions if you need to. Rewind, rewatch, pause this video. Good luck.